Hello, Thomas Smith. I'm Alzael. We've never met. I did, however, see your little discussion at MythCon with Sargon of Akkad. For those who don't know, Thomas has this podcast or other that he does where he talks about social justice, and about a month ago at MythCon, he took the stage to have a debate/discussion/pissing contest with Sargon. Or rather, I think it was meant to be an interview done by Thomas with Sargon as the interviewee, but Thomas decided instead to just come out making accusations and posture morally instead of interviewing. At which point he may as well have just bent over, slathered some lotion around his puck before presenting himself to Sargon and begging for it gently. Thomas just kind of floundered around trying to find a point to make when he realized that Sargon was immune to his shaming tactics, and, as usual for his type, that was about the only shot in his bow. Anyway, so there were some points made by you, Thomas, that Sargon never really got around to dealing with because you were tossing them out so fast. So I thought I might as well deal with them since no one else was going to bother with your bony white ass enough to do it. Don't take that personally, though. It's just that you're not very engaging or interesting. However, I'm bored and like picking the low-hanging fruit every now and then. And besides, Thomas, you're an atheism plusser. So being an atheist and anti-theist myself, I have a particular desire to see you bent over as many tables as often as possible. Actually, on that note, fun fact, Thomas. You know, it was the creation and infiltration of Atheism Plus into the atheist/skeptic community that made me first pay attention to feminism. I'd been completely uninterested in feminism and paid it absolutely no mind until then. So, when you're slathering on the Vaseline and grabbing your ankles for me, remember that you brought this on yourself. Now, let's see what Thomas has to say.
I think you've already covered this, but why do you think you should be platformed, like proactively?
Because they asked.
Why? Okay.
That's why.
So as long as
decision.
you as long as someone's interested, then...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have an argument against that? Yeah.
So then, can I ask you, you're pro freedom of speech, exchange of ideas then?
I know, I'm such a Nazi.
Yeah. But why aren't you, but at the same token, you're trying to ban what you've labeled social justice courses at
so
universities.
you'd be happy with Scientology in universities, would you? Creationist courses in universities,
So-
are they okay? Right, so yeah, we need to really get down to the principles of the thing, don't we? We need to start talking about what we're actually here to discuss.
So it's censorious to
How is it
suggest
censorious?
that somebody shouldn't put on stage someone who says, I wouldn't even rape you, to a woman who's a victim. That's censorious. Yes. But for you, someone with no expertise in a field, you're not a scientist.
That's true.
You don't know anything about it. For you, to ban books, ban courses,
Ooh,
to ban
Thomas,
courses
I think that
from
we've
a school,
encountered a straw man.
that's not censorious?
I think if you read the text exactly, you'll say, I requested they be suspended and investigated by the universities themselves.
Oh, okay. So, but
Do you not think petitioning
you
the
should be able to
universities-
drive suspension of education
Well,
based on your
Is
ideology.
it education or is it indoctrination, Thomas?
So freedom of ideas until it's something you don't agree with, then
I
you should
didn't
get...
even say ban it. I said
okay.
investigate them. Have them, I don't know,
You said
peer-reviewed.
suspend... Why on earth would you have the power to suspend what people are learning
That's
at
what
university?
a petition is, Thomas.
Why
I'm
would you think
asking
that's
them,
your
Thomas.
place? Why would you think
to
that's your
ask someone
place?
to do? Because I have a concern about it. Because it's discriminating
So
against
how is
white
that
men, and I
different
happen
from
to be a
people...
white man.
How is that different from people asking Mythicist Milwaukee to not platform you? They have a concern about what's happening.
The difference is I didn't make one of their wives cry, Thomas.
Oh.
Oh, what? You don't care about a woman now? You don't care about a woman being harassed by a bunch of SJWs because it's your team. This is why you're horrible. This is why everyone hates you. And this is why I'm here. You made me necessary.
Am I the only one that noticed his sphincter shut tight when Sargon brought up not allowing creationism in schools to highlight his hypocrisy? Because I'm pretty sure it shut so fast it was a mini sonic boom. Anyways, Thomas, allow me to explain to you what flaws you just made here. First and foremost, let's get our definitions clear and in order. Oxford Dictionary defines censorship as the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. Note that last qualification there, obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. Now, there's a reason that those qualifications are in there, and it has to do with the practicalities of running a society full of different people. I cannot, for instance, sit in a courtroom while trial is in session and belt out the chorus to Yummy 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 I've Got Love in My Tummy, no matter how awesome and underappreciated that song may be. Because this is a courtroom, a place where actual business is being conducted, and I am interfering with its business and, more importantly, with the rights of those who are here to have a legal trial. I can, however, feel free to sit outside the courtroom, either in the hall or on the building steps, and sing if I so desire. My point being that, by necessity, there are times and places for such things. Now, technically, one might consider my not being allowed to sing in said courtroom to be an act of censorship. But if it is, it's a necessary one in order to facilitate the operation of our law courts. If everyone could just speak up and talk as they wanted, the courts could not function. It's not that I am being disallowed to sing, it is that I am being disallowed to sing right there at that time, because my singing is not in line with the function of the proceedings or the purpose of the space. Or, to put it more simply, in deference to you, Thomas, a courtroom is a place for law. Anything that has nothing to do with the law should not be there because it interferes with the running of the system and has no place there. If you want to sing Ohio Express songs, there are places, both private and public, where you can do that freely. These qualifications are there in the definition to draw a distinction between not letting someone speak because it is an inappropriate time and or place, and not letting someone speak just because you don't personally like what they have to say. The latter being a violation of free speech, the former being a matter of practicality. Our belief in free speech exists specifically to allow the obscene, politically unacceptable, and the deplorable to be voiced, the exact things that you're trying to accuse Sargon of being throughout this whole interview, because the people in power have a strong tendency to see new or opposing ideas as being obscene and deplorable, which you should know since you're supposedly an atheist, and presumably should know something about how atheists and anti-theists get viewed by a certain portion of the religious population that happen to be in charge. Actually, never mind that. Look at your own group. Feminism and its ideas were once considered to be an obscenity, until you became the mainstream school of thought. Now you're still obscene, but it's an accepted obscenity, and you use it to oppress the ideas of others. This is why Sargon told you repeatedly that you have no principle. Now, what Sargon did was point out that gender studies and SJW classes in education are not in fact educational. They do not teach facts or science or reality, despite the fact that they are taught in schools, which are expressly created for the purpose of teaching facts to students. He then put forth that since these classes are not serving the purpose of the institution they are explicitly a part of, that they should have no place in those institutions. Or, to put it simply, again in deference to you, school teach facts, SJW have no facts, SJWs no be in school. SJWs in their classes are the ones singing yummy 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 in the courtroom, Thomas, in case the metaphor was too subtle for you. And Sargon is pointing out that this is not the time and place for that. He is not saying that you cannot sing yummy yummy yummy, just not in the space that is supposed to be for something else where important work is being done, and you are interfering with people's right to an education by doing this. So he is asking for this to be looked at and reviewed. That is all he asked for. He criticized it, and he asked politely for it to be fixed. Your side, on the other hand, are going to a place, a privately run place might I add, and threatening and harassing them for allowing the speech of someone that you personally don't like. And this is someone that they invited to speak. He is not trying to impose himself on their space and interfere with how they operate. He was asked there by them to come and speak. You're the ones trying to interfere with how the space normally operates. He's not singing yummy 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 in the courtroom. He is actually a part of the trial. You have no rational reason to deny him the right to speak, which is why all you can say is that he's deplorable. That's what you've got. I don't like him, so he cannot speak. That is the exact definition of censorship, you spastic tard. But here's the thing. You're even worse than a censor, Thomas. I heard that podcast you did after Sargon gave you a jolly good rogering. Let's listen to that for a minute.
Can you possibly be happy with what you did? I know you sold a lot of tickets, and you sold a lot of tickets once it became a controversy because shitlords stick together and they are really afraid of being silenced because they know their ideas are terrible, and they know as soon as people start recognizing they're terrible, they've got to band together into their little tight-knit group where sexual harassment is okay.
Oh, no, you didn't.
And if there's enough of them together in that little tight-knit group supporting each other and supporting their head shitlords, then they feel like they're okay. So here's what I want to say. This happened.
Wait a minute, Thomas. Back up there for a second, Princess. They fear being silenced because they know once their ideas are out in the open, they'll be attacked for their bad ideas and they'll need to band together. That's what you just said, right? Okay. Then why are you trying to protest against and silence us? Because if you actually believe that us bringing our ideas out into the open is what we're afraid of, and that it would hurt us so badly, you would think that you would want to have us out there talking about this stuff. Yet you try to silence us. I think you might want to check the captain of your brain ship there, bucko. He seems to be drunk at the wheel. But do go on.
We can put it behind us. You can issue an apology. As an organization, you can realize whoever is currently making the decisions, I'm not going to single people out, whoever is currently making these decisions, you can recognize that you fucked up, you made a bad decision, you got exactly the conference that we thought you were going to get, and this can never happen again. If there's an apology, if there's a recognition of there's a clear change in direction and a change in leadership, I will be happy to work with you again. You might find that odd. You might find that funny because you're probably thinking we don't want anything to do with you, Thomas. You called us out. Yeah, I did call you out, but I recognize that the organization is multifaceted. There's multiple people in it. If there's a change in leadership and good people take over and try to atone for what's happened, I'm more than happy to try to forgive and forget and heal this wound. I'm more than happy to do that. I'm going to be doing everything in my power to make sure that this conference and this group are not successful in the future. I'm going to try to convince people not to go. I'm going to convince people not to agree to speak there in the first place. What you did was not acceptable. I've struggled with so many people I've talked to try to convince them that no, this is not okay. And it's really hard. And all I can say, if you are someone who thinks this is acceptable, who thinks this behavior, this tweeting toward women in this way, this sexual harassment, or anyone, by the way, men or women, but we're talking about this specific tweet. If you think that is acceptable, you aren't valuing the right things. You aren't putting enough weight on people's feelings, on the trauma that people face, on how that makes women feel, how that makes everyone feel when someone at your conference has done that and they are applauded. You are just not putting the proper weight to that. I don't know how to get you to do that. Believe me, I've been trying. If I had the perfect answer, I would have convinced a lot more people. I don't know how many ways to say, don't be a fucking asshole. I don't know how many, but apparently I have to say it. So recognize that you have overlooked that. You have not valued that enough and realize you made a mistake and change. And furthermore, what I encourage you to do, if you are a part of the Mythicist Milwaukee group, and if this isn't happening, if there is no change in direction, by all means, try to make one happen. Try to make a change in leadership happen. If that does not happen, I encourage you to leave the group very publicly. Leave the group very publicly, make a statement, explain why this is unacceptable. And you know what? If you want to start another group, you're going to have a hell of a lot of help. I will help you. Email me. Talk to me.
See, here's my point, Thomas. You're worse than just a censor. A censor would only prevent someone from speaking. You want to also compel speech. It's not enough to not platform Sargon. They have to kowtow to you and your way of thinking. You demand apology and atonement. You just did it. And if they don't give you what you demand, you threaten to harm them financially. By the way, checking up on MythCon, there are women among their higher-ups. So you're threatening women as well with this, Thomas, you misogynistic fuck. Why do you hate women? You're a deplorable. You came out to do an interview and opened it up by insulting your audience and the person you were supposed to be interviewing. You ranted and screamed like a petulant child, then threw a hissy fit and stormed off the stage crying, "I don't want to play with him," only to whine about it on your podcast later and demand that you be accommodated or else. You even sent your drunken buddy and his bitchy girlfriend out to accost Sargon outside after the con, all while questioning the morals of others. But listen to your own language, Thomas, for just a minute. Atone, forgive, good people take over. You aren't valuing the right things. And you people claim to be anti-theists. No, you just picked a different faith and a different altar to bend your knees to. That's why as soon as you guys poked your head out of the sand amongst the atheist movement, I immediately opposed you, because I could tell immediately that you're just another kind of authoritarian hypocrite with a faith-based belief, no different than the Christians, the Muslims, and every other primitive monkey faith that I make fun of. Anyways, Do you see the difference now, Thomas? Or do I need to simplify it again? But let's skip ahead to my next point of argument, Thomas. For those following along, this is at about the 26 to 27 minute mark.
There's two equally qualified candidates, and you need a tiebreaker. Pick the underrepresented person.
Discriminate based on their race. That's your argument. Racial discrimination. That's what you're advocating for. Against freedom.
You're that much of a snowflake that you think if you use socioeconomic... What about socioeconomic?
Whoa, hang on. I thought, are you honestly going to ask me if I'm triggered? Is there something laughable about being triggered now, is there, Thomas? Go on, undermine your own movement.
When you're triggered for white victims, it is funny.
It's because they're white.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
White male, you're triggered for white male victims.
Yeah. Do you actually realize what you just said? That it is laughable to be upset when a white person is a victim. You just said that. In only one back and forth of a few sentences, you justify doing anything one could ever want to do to a white person. 247 million people, Thomas. Your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters. You removed them all from the category of potential victims. Worse, you claimed it was humorous, something to laugh at. This is what you just did, Thomas. Assigned an entire race with the label of cannot be a victim. I can't repeat this enough because it is so inhuman of you to do this. This, Thomas, is Nazi-type thinking. This is what justifies and precedes genocides, Thomas. It's why the term feminazi is used so often, because in many very disturbing ways, feminism and by extension social justiceism is Nazism, just with genetic destiny replaced with privilege. Let me just say, Thomas, I sincerely hope that you and your wife or girlfriend or favorite amorous circus animal get beaten to within an inch of your lives and violently taken sexually. And, if anyone is going to get mad at me for saying that, remember, I'm not being racist, spiteful, or wicked. I'm just being funny. Ha, ha, ha. Anyways, let's try and slip in one more before I become too disgusted to listen to you, Thomas.
Choices will always be different. I'm not saying everyone has to make the same choices, but the evidence is that certain groups get discriminated against when you do resume studies and
you have affirmative action.
What?
Affirmative action.
When you do resume studies and you see that women's resumes are rejected way more often, you think, what do we do about that?
I don't know. I would have to see the resumes and see why they're being rejected.
No, it's the same resume for a man and a woman. It's a blind study. You put a man's name on an identical resume to a woman, they get rejected.
Yeah, there may be a multitude of reasons for that. But you know what I don't think will solve it is gender discrimination.
Do you think we need to solve that problem? If that is what is allowing 95% of CEOs to be male, if that's what it's allowing...
You're assuming this, you're not proving this. I don't know that that's the case.
We have the science and the studies that tell us this discrimination happens.
Okay, Thomas. Lucky for you, I happen to be very familiar with these studies. They actually came up very often in some of the places I frequented until recently. So I've already had more than a few chances to review them and pick them apart. So let's take a look at one of them and see if we really have the science, since you are, as you claim, a data guy. As always, links in the below bar. So this is from Corinne A. Moss and others, titled, Science Faculty's Subtle Gender Biases Favor Male Students. Whoa, don't give away the plot right off the bat there, sweetheart. Despite efforts to recruit and retain more women, a stark gender disparity persists within academic science. Abundant research has demonstrated gender bias in many demographic groups, but has yet to experimentally investigate whether science faculty exhibit a bias against female students that could contribute to the gender disparity in academic science. In a randomized double-blind study, science faculty from research-intensive universities rated the application materials of a student who was randomly assigned either a male or female name for a laboratory manager position. Faculty participants rated the male applicant as significantly more competent and hireable than the identical female applicant. These participants also selected a higher starting salary and offered more career mentoring to the male applicant. The gender of the faculty participants did not affect responses, such that female and male faculty were equally likely to exhibit bias against the female student. Mediation analysis indicated that the female student was less likely to be hired because she was viewed as less competent. We also assessed faculty participants' pre-existing subtle bias against women. Why did you even think there would be that in the first place? using a standard instrument and found that pre-existing subtle bias against women played a moderating role, such that subtle bias against women was associated with less support for the female student but was unrelated to reactions to the male student. These results suggest that interventions addressing faculty gender bias might advance the goal of increasing the participation of women in science. Okay, so we know what they were trying to do. Now let's see what they actually did. A broad nationwide sample of biology, chemistry, and physics professors evaluated the application materials of an undergraduate science student who had ostensibly applied for a science laboratory manager position. All participants received the same materials, which were randomly assigned either the name of a male 63 or a female 64 students. Student gender was thus the only variable that differed between conditions. You fucking liars. Using previously validated scales, participants rated the students' competence and hireability, as well as the amount of salary and amount of mentoring they would offer the student. Faculty participants believed that their feedback would be shared with the student they had rated. Okay, so they rated the responses that they got based on these three categories, as well as how much they offered for a starting salary, and they got these results where the female applicant got ranked lower by the faculty who reviewed her in comparison to the theoretical male student. First off, their sample size was only 127 professors. That's pathetic and next to useless, and I'll explain why in a moment. But they chose 127 STEM professors from 6 universities, basically 21 from each. To put that into better perspective, there are currently 2,618 universities in the United States. That's how pathetic their sample size is. The real reason for the failure, however, is in the methodology itself. See if you can spot the problem here. They took the same application for the position, and they split their groups of researchers into 2 groups. One group of 63 got the application with the man's name, and one group of 64 got the application with the girl's name. The one application. And that probably gave away the big problem, doesn't it? If both groups only got one application, then how do you know that the gender was any sort of relevant variable in the differences? Perhaps, just perhaps, the difference was in the professors and how they evaluated the application itself, due to the professors having different individual standards. For all you know, that same professor who said he didn't like John's paper wouldn't have liked it if Jenny's name had been on it either. But we'll never know, because the second rates who ordered this study never bothered to think about such things. But that torpedoes any results or claims they might make, even if their shitty sampling didn't already. It did. Their results are meaningless and don't reflect a bias at all. You would have to test their reactions to both sexes. Again, to explain it simply for you, John, imagine I gave you a test to mark, and it has John's name on it. You give John an A. Now, can I conclude that you gave John an A because he was a man, or did you give him an A because you actually thought his work was worth the mark? Well, we would also have to see how you do with a woman's test, wouldn't we? Preferably many tests. Now, let's say we gave the same test to a friend of yours, except put Jenny on the paper. He marks it a C. Did he do this because Jenny was a girl, or because he genuinely thought the work deserved the mark? Again, you would need to see him with a similar man's paper, or give some other form of control variable. Instead, what they did is look at you and your friend and conclude that Jenny must be the victim of sexist bias. And I will draw your attention to their own methodology and materials SI section. Following conventions established in previous experimental work, the laboratory manager application. Following conventions established in previous experimental work, the laboratory manager application was designed to reflect slightly ambiguous competence, allowing for variability in participant responses and the utilization of biased evaluation strategies, if they exist. So they knew they were damn well doing it. It was designed to be specifically ambiguous in quality and to elicit variable responses from the professors. Thus, we followed procedures established in previous similar research by designing an applicant who was in the ballpark for a laboratory manager position, but was not an obvious star. For example, although the applicant had completed 2 years of research experience and co-authored a journal article, their grade point average was slightly low, 3.2, and they were described as having withdrawn from one class before the final. Do you think this might have accounted for the difference, Thomas? That the applicant was designed to be middle of the road, meaning you will of course get different results based on the standards of the individual professor evaluating it. For example, some professors might have looked less favorably on that whole, having withdrawn from one class before the final thing, whereas others might not have weighted it as that big of a deal. Some might have been more turned off by the low grade point average, whereas some might not have cared that much in comparison with the other good points of the paper. Furthermore, these criteria they looked at were evaluated by a series of questions with a 7-point score. For instance, one of the several questions they were asked was, did the applicant strike you as competent? They were then asked to rate from 1, not at all competent, to 7, very competent. These results were then averaged for their final chart, which is where the small sample size comes in. With only 63 people on each side, all it takes is 3 or 4 extremely negative or extremely positive reactions to the application to completely skew your numbers beyond repair. Every harsh critic matters more, as does every professor with glowing praise. So really, this whole thing depends upon which side got the harsher critics. Look back at the table of their results for a moment. The differences between the men and women in each category is a little over half a point only. Hell, if you just got unlucky and you managed to get 2 or 3 actual sexists in that study, you could easily get that result from the average. That's why you need a sample that is actually fucking representative. This applies to their stats on payment as well. They report that men were offered $30,000 a year on average, and women were only offered $26,000, which they claim is a significant difference. But again, each difference means a lot more with so few samples. For this, they used an 8-point scale, with 1 being a starting salary of $15,000 and 8 being a starting salary of $50,000. Which, okay, first off, with that much of a difference between the choices, the fact that the end results were only separated by $4,000 is not really as significant as they claimed, especially since this is their question being asked. If you had to choose one of the starting salaries for the applicant, what would it be? If you had to choose, not what they deserve or should get. If I had to choose, I'd probably pick the lowest simply because I want to pay them as little as possible. Which may not have been everyone's thinking, I'll grant you, but it only would have taken a few like me to easily get that $4,000 difference when average, especially if you had a few other generous ones on the other end of the scale. And this isn't even getting into how they claim to measure and account for unconscious bias in their tests. Basically, this study is bullshit all around, Thomas. I could have done an entire video just picking this one apart. And Thomas, out of the 3 studies that I know of done on this subject, this was the good one. I just want to make clear that I led off with the strongest study your side has. Now here's how you actually do it, Thomas. This study here sampled 900 faculty members from over 371 colleges and universities. They did 4 separate experiments for 4 different types of jobs and hiring requirements. They did not just test a man and 1 woman, they also included applications for married men, women, single men, women with children, etc. And their conclusion was a 2-to-1 hiring bias in favor of women. Read this, Thomas. I know that you've probably never read an actual study in your life, but at least read this one. This is what actual research looks like. Burned it into your memory, because if you and yours have their way, we might never see this again. Oh well, I think I've picked on the crippled boy long enough for one day. Just try to do better, Thomas. But I won't be holding my breath on that. Later.